book I've just come across by Cornelia Muller, I think she's called. I can't remember the exact title of the book. It's something like Sleeping and Waking Metaphors, or it relates to that concept anyway. I haven't read the whole book yet, I've just read the introductory chapter. But I like the idea of it. I like the idea that metaphors sleep and that metaphors wake. Because really she's contrasting that with the usual distinction between living and dead metaphors. A dead metaphor is one that presumably started life as some kind of strange poetic allusion, and then over the course of time the meaning of it has been completely lost, so it just stands as a kind of semiotic gesture, kind of sound, which just indicates the abstract concept that it refers to. A dead metaphor doesn't carry any of the traces of its origins, supposedly. An example would be something like the phrase "on the other hand." I have no idea where the phrase "on the other hand" comes from, but I presume at some point in the past it must have referred to choices, and with objects placed in one or other hand that you would talk about. But now when people use the phrase "on the other hand," it's assumed that they're using a dead metaphor, that the idea of hands and otherness doesn't cross their mind at all, that there's no sense of a choice between two perhaps equally weighted or two entities that are being weighed up. There's no sense of that, supposedly. I say supposedly because all of the work on conceptual metaphor, chiefly associated with George Lakoff, Mark Johnson and others, says that dead metaphors aren't really dead at all. A phrase like "on the other hand," to the extent that it allows us, to the extent that we are able to think using that term at all, is only possible because we are activating some kind of embodied metaphor. Now, the metaphor might have changed in our mind. We might not be bringing up exactly the same kind of metaphorical schema to do with hands and weighing and balancing and all of those kinds of things that the original metaphor alluded to. But something is going on like that. Otherwise, according to those kinds of understandings of embodied cognition, we wouldn't be able to understand it at all. But in that sense, dead metaphors aren't simply symbols used within some kind of disembodied computational symbol manipulation system. They still feature within kind of imaginary actions that the imaginary body is doing somehow, which forms the basis of our cognition. That's contrasted with live metaphors, which absolutely are of the type that they're used overtly and consciously, and which overlap with things like analogies and similes and those kinds of tropes, really. Those kind of uses of quite clearly and openly poetic, figurative speech. Okay, so back to Cornelia Muller. What she's saying, I think, is that distinction between the live and the dead is better replaced by a distinction between the awake and the sleeping. Now, I know she goes into much more complexity than I've been able to wrap my head around yet, but certainly just that idea of a wakeful, a sleeping metaphor, I'm finding quite useful. Partly because it seems to intuitively fit with conscious and non-conscious processing. To the extent that a lot of processing is going on in my brain and my mind right now that I'm not aware of, it's happening non-consciously. It's kind of happening in my sleep. I think of that part of my mind as being the sleeping part, and the conscious part as being the waking part. I don't know if that's accurate, it's not, but certainly how I'm thinking of it. And that duality of different types of metaphor fits well within that. That there is, I can use metaphors in this wakeful, conscious sense, but they're also figuring with this kind of ongoing dream of my unconscious mind, that's causing, that's allowing me to process information constantly. So I'm finding it quite useful in that. Other kinds of relationships I'm finding, which are probably spurious, but I'm finding interesting anyway, is to do with, in relation to wakeful and sleeping, I guess, is to do with focal and subsidiary awareness, which are related to that, I think. Focal and subsidiary awareness is a term that comes out of Polanyi, but it's a kind of visual illusion he's making. We'll go down here, out the way. And what he's saying is that whilst we might be focally aware of the thing that's in the middle of our, as I say, it's visual, in the middle of our gaze right now, so I'm looking at this particular fork in this tree, and I'm focally aware of that. There's a whole lot of other stuff, a whole lot of peripheral visual stuff, there's a lot of stuff to do with depth perception, there's all kinds of other things going on, which I'm only subsidiarily aware of, which means it's not in my conscious mind right now, but it's contributing to and giving the kind of context for that focal awareness. And again, I think that has a useful relationship to these sleeping and waking metaphors. When I put my focus on a metaphor in a sentence, let's say, like I just did a few moments ago in this sentence, on the other hand, when I put my focus on that, I clearly recognize it as a metaphor. But what happens as part of that focusing on that metaphor is that all the rest of my language drops into the background and becomes subsidiary, and the whole metaphorical content of all those are the parts of phrases that I'm using, which are absolutely of the same order, are absolutely metaphorical. They kind of drop away and become part of the background murmuring of my awareness. It's a little bit like that thing where you say a sentence in different ways, putting the emphasis on different terms. Like when you say on the phrase "on the other hand," you might say "on the other hand," which draws attention to the word "on," and everything else becomes subsidiary. Or you might say "on the other hand," in which case "hand" kind of pops out and becomes focal, and the rest of the sentence becomes supporting and subsidiary. I don't know what that's going to do with it, really. It's just another parallel that I can't help myself drawing, really. Go on, you two.